Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of VNture Podcast, along with your hosts, Taros and MR. We have the return again of our guest from last time, Bored Ronin, as he is here to shed some light on one of the more unique genres involved in visual novels, Chuuni. So, Ronin, can you please give yourself another quick self-introduction to anyone whom this may be your first time seeing you?
Yes, I'm Ronin. I make videos sometimes about video games and visual novels, and I'm a professional Chuuni bio.
Mm-hmm. And so, what exactly is Chuuni? What is Chuuni bio?
Chuuni bio means 14-year-old syndrome. It refers to like a person who, even after growing up, they still have delusions of grandeur and still believe themselves to have like magic powers, even though that's not like within reality. But Chuuni itself, I think, is kind of a difficult thing to describe. It's personally, I've always seen it as like stories with urban fantasy settings, and they emphasize rule of cool above all else.
I can't say I'm too familiar with too many Chuuni titles, but, from generally seeing public opinion of it and examples, it's, like you mentioned, the sort of thing a 14-year-old boy would think is cool, of magic powers and Latin chanting and dark lords and giant worldwide conspiracies underground. Things that are maybe obviously not happening in real life, but someone's imagination is running wild. So you would say?
Yeah, it's exactly that. That's a good way of putting it. It's like the stuff that I enjoyed when I was 14 and still enjoy now because I'm a Chuuni bio, I guess.
Okay. And you just touched on this a little. What does it mean for a VN to be Chuuni? Is it as simple as some of these concepts becoming reality?
Yeah, I think so. But sometimes I feel like Chuuni characters that are in like a real setting, but they believe themselves to be like having magic powers even if they don't. That could be kind of funny. But Chuuni stories themselves usually are like serious. Take these ideas seriously and they're real.
And so, what would be some visual novel titles that you would describe as being Chuuni?
Yeah, DSRI is an obvious one. It's like the most Chuuni visual novels. Everything by that writer, Masada, is pretty Chuuni, although only DSRI and spin-off are available in English. Fate Stay Night's also a well-known one, probably the most well-known, and yeah, it's a very Chuuni. Nasu's a Chuuni bio. I know that for sure.
And for anyone who maybe isn't aware of DSRI, can you explain to them, a general summary of what it's about and how it's Chuuni?
So DSRI is a story about these magical Nazis who are immortal, who in present time they want to bring back the leader, Reinhard Heydrich, who's based on a guy who actually existed, and they are opposed by Ren Fuji, the protagonist. In order to bring them back, they have to do this ritual that can cause mayhem across the city. And to fight these Nazis, Ren kind of gains these magic powers. And all the magic powers in the story are kind of based on the character's own inner cravings, and they can warp reality itself. It's really cool. And they all have their own personal chance to activate their powers and stuff, called like Baraya. And all the systems are all based on like the Hebrew tree of life and stuff. It's all very cool. There's also a lot of like references to Norse mythology.
For a title like this, obviously, when it goes so hard on some of the moods and themes and action scenes, has it ever been an issue to you where you've wanted to recommend titles these sorts of Chuuni titles to others, but you do have to be aware that some people don't take to it.
Yeah, I've heard some people get exhausted by the fight scenes, but personally, I've never found that to be a problem. Maybe because I'm a Chuuni bio who really enjoys these cool fights. I can understand how people wouldn't vibe with it, I guess. So I guess you have to be careful in recommending this stuff. But I do hope people go into it with an open mind and kind of see what it's about, like more than just the fight scenes.
It often, covers the themes as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I do think the fight scenes, especially in DSRI themselves, are more about the clash of ideals between characters and are more philosophical than literal. Like they're yelling to each other about their ideals, and whoever ideals are more like correct or not really correct, but whoever really trumps the other character in this verbal battle is the one who usually wins.
Are there other titles off the top of your head, aside from your favorite, that you would also classify as Chuuni?
Demon Bane is an obvious one. Deus Ex Machina Demon Bane by Nitro Plus. That's one that's not as well known, but it's still pretty cool.
And it exhibits a staple of a Chuuni element, meaning recurring chants. And I think this, in my opinion, it resonates with me when it comes to Chuuni. It has to be some sort of rule of cool that feels out of place. Yes, you have a big clash. You have an opponent, yet still, in this desperate moment, you still find the time to chant the power, the summoning, the attack, because chanting it makes it stronger, and we all know it.
Yeah, but when they are given a chance to give their chant, and I guess it's not interrupted because the opponents have respect, or just like listening to chants, I guess.
True. Yeah, it was an interesting title, especially since that one part of that Chuuni aspect is, how can I say it, protagonist utilizing what is eldritch power, but subverting it and using in a good way. And I think like a lot of protagonists that have Chuuni elements exhibit that. They take something that is dark, edgy, in a weird way evil, but they use it for good. And I felt like that's a very wholesome twist to it all.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's kind of like a Devil Man, the old manga, where the guy gets powers from a devil, turn into a devil, and he uses to fight other devils to protect humanity. And I think a lot of visual novels and stories modern day take inspiration from that. That's a very classic manga. But yeah, characters using these demonic kind of evil abilities to fight evil is a pretty cool concept.
And I feel like a lot of Chuuni elements in VNs that I appreciate also takes inspiration in Cthulhian mythos, with Demon Bane, for example. All those mech pilots as well as mechs were inspired by creatures and folklore of H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, everyone loves Lovecraft. I think Demon Bane has pretty neat interpretations of his mythos. Like I like how Al Azif is a cute girl as well as a book. That's pretty cool. And also that there's another cute book girl. I can't remember her name, but she was with Master Therian, but she was also really cool.
Oh, the narcotic manuscripts. Yeah, true.
Yeah, that's what she was called.
Yeah, that's true. And the theme, or at least the color of gold, was very important in Cthulhian mythos, and it was very respectfully treated in that title, in Demon Bane. Whenever you saw the golden color, you knew something related to alchemy or eldritch magic was afoot.
Yeah. I think the way it uses the Chuuni elements with the Cthulhu mythos is really cool. Like it shows how human willpower can overcome even these eldritch beings. they're like usually just unstoppable in like Lovecraft stories. They just turn people insane by looking at them. But like the characters in Demon Bane like overcome them with their spirit and willpower, and it's overall a very optimistic story, despite like some dark like monsters and stuff in it.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a prevailing motif in Lovecraftian stories is those adversities are out of your comprehension, and only your will and steadfastness will allow you to prevail.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think the protagonist of Demon Bane's pretty cool. He goes through a lot throughout the story, but he overcomes it because of his spirit, and he has some really cool speeches and stuff about like human willpower. He's a really cool guy.
Yeah, to this day I remember a moment when all hope seems lost, when the protagonist is downcast. He tried before to the best of his ability and he failed again, and back on his luck. And he said, no more. And he rises to occasion. And that was a very vindicating moment. Like, yeah, it made me cheer him up. Like, you go, guy. You go, guy. And he obviously, in that moment of transformation, he gets the blackest coat, the most edges of the guns, and crafts the most custom of the ammo that burns evil. Like, oh, that moment was perfect.
Yeah, that moment's incredible, especially like, compared to how it was early in the story. He was kind of pathetic. He finally like rises up on that occasion, is able to fight for himself. He like doesn't even need Al Isaac to help him. He's just that cool.
Yeah, exactly. Up until that point, all his successes were reliant on others, but not anymore. He's so low, and the only direction is up. Yeah, it's like so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Demon Bane's great.
Speaking, this might go onto a little bit of a detour, but something that I thought of while you guys were discussing Demon Bane was the influence of power levels involved in Chuuni works. And power levels are always a contentious discussion of, oh, who is stronger, who would win in a fight, what about this, what about that? How often does that come up in Chuuni works? Because I feel like, in any sort of conflict, when you have these grand, godly, mythical strengths involved, that eventually you're going to get into discussions of those power levels and who should have won and whatnot. How often does that come up?
Well, because Chuuni visual novels are so action-focused, I'd say that power levels are a factor there. But I think a lot of the times, especially with DSR, I think it does it very well. That's more about a character's belief and ideals. So like even weaker characters can be useful and fight on their own if their ideals are strong enough. I do like seeing like the weaker characters being able to fight with characters you think are much stronger, whose power levels should be higher, and yet still win. I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to power levels specifically, I tend to never think about it too much in those Chuuni moments. And if I think the closest to power levels I had in my mind implanted all the time, I mean, gods notwithstanding, obviously, but the power level comparison was Fate. And now we can be critical whether or not they executed it well or not, but they had a series of categories of attributes, whether or not it was agility, speed, luck, etc., that were displaced on a sheet, of a character sheet that measured those attributes against each other, so you could compare two servants against. But then again, that wasn't the defining factor. Your wit, your cleverness, your application, certain weaknesses, that was way more important than statistics. And I felt like, at the very least, that aspect of power level was very well presented. Your knowledge of those servants, those heroic spirits, and how to exploit them, that was way more important than agility B beats agility C.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say that the whole power levels arguments, in online discourse and all of that, it usually annoys me because there is so much to it than just comparing. It's like, oh, well, this weapon is just an auto win. He's got no answer. Or, he's obviously stronger and faster, so that's that. And it's like, okay, there's so much more to it, though. It's not going to be a guaranteed win every time. There's still wiggle room, plenty. And I feel like, ironically, the more ridiculous you get with powers and magic systems and whatnot, the more heated these power level discussions get. Is that something that you agree with generally, Ronin, about power levels and Chuuni influence?
Yeah, I guess power levels are a little Chuuni. I think power levels more come from like Dragon Ball Z and people like measuring the characters there. But I honestly don't care that much about power levels themselves. Because it makes it so like weak characters are just kind of useless. Like Dragon Ball characters that are weak just get benched and almost do nothing, unfortunately. So I like to see characters that are weaker just keep getting used in the story and are still like useful even later on. I do think that Nasu is really good at like making the fights not just about power levels or pure strength. It's strategic. It's about knowledge and knowing your enemy, like MR was saying.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Ronin that I don't really engage in the discussion of power levels. Because, like he mentioned, it just nullifies any role of any character that is below a benchmark. Like there is a minimal threshold before you are even considered. And what? Is everybody below that pointless? No. They can contribute. It all relates back to the story and how it's presented. But maybe ultimately I just don't engage with the power level discussions whatsoever. Although, like I said, I admit it was implanted in my mind when it comes to Fate, because it was there. You had statistics. So I had that running in my mind, but I didn't necessarily question whether or not in the story presented, right? You have a fight between two characters. Oh, he scored a hit, but he shouldn't because the agility different. No, please, come on. Let the story be the story.
On another totally different note, Ronin, what is your opinion about romance in Chuuni works? Now, this being visual novels and how there's, usually multiple routes that center around romancing a specific heroine, how well do you think that's implemented in Chuuni works? How much do you personally like it yourself?
Personally, I'm not that big of a fan of romance. Like, I don't care that much about it. Usually, like Chuuni stories like DSRI, it exists, but it's not super important. And I think that's how it should be. Like, people say that the romance in DSRI isn't that great, and they're probably right. Could be done a bit better, but it's not that important to me. I think Fate actually does romance a bit better. I think the romance between like Shiro and the main girls is done pretty well most of the time.
And in fact, you have the whole Heaven's Feel route, which is almost entirely focused around his relationship with Sakura. So, I feel like, as with any other visual novel genre, there's a time and place for it, but inherently, do you think romance and Chuuni genres work together well?
It can. I do like when like the protagonist or even the villain is motivated by love. I think that's a very strong and interesting motivation.
Ooh,
But
yeah.
at the same time, it's not necessary.
What about you, MR? What do you think?
The motivation argument just made me think, because inherently I was about to say, I don't think that's the point. But the motivation of romance and love being the core reason of the Chuuni behavior, that's actually something I could see working. Now, on the flip side, let's consider the opposite, right? Let's not think about the Chuuni VN, but rather the one that has Chuuni elements. I feel like when it comes to Chuuni elements in VNs and romance. I really dig when there's a Chuuni power couple. Those endings are always hilarious.
A Chuuni
The
power
Chuuni
couple?
yeah, but the Chuuni protagonist finds a Chuuni girl, and the hijinks that always ensue is something glorious.
That sounds more like a comedy.
Oh, I need to find a Chuuni girl.
Hell yeah, bro.
Yes, exactly.
Um,
Again, those are always a riot to read. And just an example of what I meant, Ronin, on Runs 9, there is a possibility of the Chuuni girl, and Runs steps up and behaves similar to her, and that's a very Chuuni ending.
Oh yeah, Miracle Tor. I love her. Yeah,
Exactly.
she's one of
She's
the
amazing.
best girls in the series.
Yep.
Let me see. On another note, you've been talking about Chuuni titles and whatnot, but it's also commonplace to see one specific character who acts Chuuni, the Chuuni Bayo I think you mentioned, in an otherwise, relatively normal setting. And their, exaggerated eccentricities get played off for maybe comedy, as, ridiculous. What is the difference between having a Chuuni visual novel, set up entirely as that, as the setting, versus one character sort of appearing as the sideshow?
I think, real Chuuni visual novels are serious and they have the whole magic stuff is real, but having just one character that's a Chuuni bio doesn't really make the story inherently Chuuni. They usually just have like a Chuuni character just for fun, which I do like. They usually are pretty funny.
But they have totally different dynamics, though, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like,
Because, I mean, on the one hand, it could either be played for personal drama or, like I mentioned, for comedy. Chusotsu is one of my favorite, indie titles, and it indeed has one character who is constantly sprouting off about finding, like, the deep mana root and tracking the evil darkness waves in the air. And the main character is like, okay, you do you, buddy. And seeing this viewpoint from the main character is very different from, seeing a visual novel from a Chuuni's point of view. Because I guess it's the setting that entrenches it, the setting that determines what is normal in the environment. And I think that's a big factor in determining whether the visual novel, treats Chuuni as something serious, played for drama, or, not. Personally, I haven't read too many Chuuni titles, but even then, I'd still prefer, I'm the kind of person who would prefer to embrace it head on, to be drenched in those theatrics entirely and to see the grand drama playing out, instead of having it be like one, puzzle piece of the bigger picture, one that may not completely fit within the structure. What do you think about that, Ronin?
Yeah, I think you have a point. Having a normal person's perspective on a weird person like a Chuuni bio is pretty interesting. I do think, like maybe having a Chuuni bio character that uses that Chuuni bio-ness as an escape mechanism to escape from reality, it would be a pretty interesting thing to do. Like in a normal drama visual novel, like without any of the magic being real, I do think stuff like that could work pretty well.
To be fair, I personally gravitate to titles that have the Chuuni protagonist, but I remember there were a couple that had a multiple heroine routes, pick your ending deal, in which one of the heroines is Chuuni Bio. And I think in each and every single title I remember, whenever you had that girl ending, it, and I kind of like that reveal that it gets uncovered that despite being normal guy in normal high school life, the product itself has been Chuuni in the past, and now it resurfaces. It always cranks me up. But again, it leads to the Chuuni couple hijinks.
Oh man. Ronin, who is your favorite character in a Chuuni work? I don't mean just like someone who you personally like the most. I would say this is just someone who maybe contributes the most to the setting. Someone who helps make that title as over the top, as ridiculous, as, 14-year-old cool mindset. What kind of character do you think really embodies that spirit the most that you liked?
Somebody that embodies Chuuni. Maybe like Mercurius in DSRI. I do think he is very important to the plot, but I think talking about why is a bit of a spoiler. But one thing that really is Chuuni and cool about him is how much he talks, which can annoy most people. But like he himself says he's very verbose and just likes the sound of his own voice. So he's always just talking and going on these like long speeches. And it's really cool. And also, the other like main villain, Reinhard, also equally important. He's just like the coolest guy who also just goes on these long speeches and has a really cool voice. And he like wants to become God. That's like his main goal. And he's like just unstoppable in battle.
Mm-hmm. I like how you mentioned two big highlights of one of which is that someone who monologues a ton. And it's not just, giving some sort of speech out. It's about the villainous intent. It's over dramatic. It's theatrical. It's the melodramatic. That's what makes something Chuuni, right?
Yeah, that's why I love it. As over dramatic and over the top as possible.
Hell yeah. And then also with Reinhardt about mentioning how he wants to be a god and he's unstoppable in battle. The whole premise of someone becoming larger than life is that same embodiment, right?
Yeah, Reinhardt is a very larger than life character, despite being based on a real person, funny enough. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what's funny is that they're the villains, right?
Yeah, they're like the two main villains. Mostly like Reinhard, but Mercurius is also very important to the story, and is like the two of them are partners, basically.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that because usually it's the hero, the main character, who I guess is the star of the show, establishes the story. But in this case, no offense to Ren, but the villains of Mercurius and Reinhardt are also just incredible, overpowering presences who you can feel their influence all throughout the VN, right?
Yeah, DSRI was really good at like characterizing the villains. I'd say the villains in that, the LDO, they kind of overshadow the protagonist's characters because they're just like that cool and sympathetic and kind of tragic. But I like Ren a lot and Shiro, those like two main characters. They're cool. They're like really good characters, but at the same time, the LDO are there doing their insane things. They kind of just they're they're too Chuuni.
Do you think that's a good or a bad thing? Having the villains be such, bigger stars, I guess, than the protagonist.
I don't mind it. Personally, I've always like really liked villains, especially when they're done well. So seeing a story that gives a lot of attention and focus to the villains is really cool to me. I still think that does a good job at making the protagonist likable, because some people don't seem to like Ren, but I like him a lot. I'd say he's one of my favorite protagonists in visual novels, but he's still overshadowed a little bit by like Reinhard and Mercurius and Wilhelm because of how like charismatic all those characters are.
Charisma goes for a lot. This, MR, do you generally think that it's a good or bad thing that the villains outshine the main character?
I mean, it depends on the villain. I mean, that's a kind of cop-out answer, right?
Does it?
What do you mean?
You said
Yeah,
it depends on the villain. Does it depend on the villain?
Yeah.
How so?
Depends. Because if the villain is, how can I say it? Empathic. If you can feel the empathy towards the villain, and at that point, I don't see the problem of it out of the villain itself outshining the protagonist. But if you make him comically evil, I don't think I like that. At that point, I would definitely prefer the protagonist given the central stage. And the one example I had in mind is, I think it's Escalator. I think that's the title you're currently reading, Ronin. Beatblade's Escalator. It's about the group of heroines trying to protect city from invaders. There's like a invasion of enemy forces, kind of recurring villain of the week kind of deal. And those are pretty standard regular villain, but the main villains have a so compelling backstory, you don't mind if they take the center stage. That's my approach. If they were more boring, then I would like yawn every time their story has been expanded. So I would say it depends. It depends how relatable and how empathetic you can make a villain.
You can certainly find love in any of the wildest places, even in Chuuni titles.
Hell yeah.
On that note, I think we'll have to be wrapping it up for today's episode. Thank you so much for dropping by again, Ronin.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was an honor to be back.
It was our pleasure to talk once again with you, the resident Chuuni expert, the professional Chuuni. We definitely used your expertise. And to all listeners, please check him out. He's the Chuuni extraordinaire. He has amazing videos. Subscribe to him. And on that note, VNture out.
VNture out.
VNture out.